What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Playmaker's Corner podcast. I'm your host for today, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V, and we are bringing you yet another episode, week 5 of the 2026 Women's College Flag Football season. We are recapping all the games from March 9th to March 15th on all levels here. NAIA, junior college, D1, D2, D3, all those levels, as long as they are not club teams and are varsity teams for the most part. We are talking about them on this episode. And it was another fun week of women's college flag football here. Make sure you tune in to Thursday's episodes where we have our rankings and recognition episode where we talk about all the great players and programs from this past week. But on this one, we're going to talk about some great games here, and so without further ado, let's just go ahead and hop right into it. Alright, now I got your Week 5 D3 recap here. Not as much going on this week as last week, I feel. There were a number of games that were postponed because of weather, so there is that. But I'll talk about the games that did happen. Let's go ahead and start on March 9th here. That is Monday. We had one game. We had Montclair State playing Mercy, and Montclair is a first-year program out of New Jersey, and they would go ahead and get the win, 53-6, which, like I said, is going to be their first win in program history. Let's go ahead and look at the stats here from that game. Passing-wise, Hadia Bell led with 4 of 9 for 60 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Genevieve Farah had 1 33-yard pass, and then Sofia Del Grosso was 1 of 2 for 4 yards here. Bell also had 35 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Genevieve Farah had a 15-yard rushing touchdown, And then on the ground, it was actually Emily Del Rosario who led with 69 rushing yards on 4 carries, followed by NAIA Underwood with 45 rushing yards and the hat-trick, 3 rushing touchdowns there. Receiving-wise, Serenity Muhammad had 1 reception for 33 yards, Maya Annika 1 for 28 yards and a touchdown, and then Kamora Weston 1 for 5 and a touchdown there. No receiver had over 1 reception, which is really interesting there. And then defensively for them, Maya Annika led with 3 flagpoles, and then Bree Carter and Stephanie, I think it's Zikako, had a sack each. But interception-wise, this Montclair State defense was catching a whole bunch. Sofia De Grosso 2, Kadia Braxton had 1, Celia Allen, Gina Marie Greenhall, Angelina Varelli, and Serenity Muhammad all had interception in this game here, or a interception in this game, along with Sofia De Grosso's 2. That's a grand total of, I believe, 7 interceptions, which is a whole bunch to have in this first game here. It's also worth noting that the first touchdown in the program's history was a pick 6. So just putting that out there. And I believe the first offensive touchdown was a Hadia Bell passing touchdown. So just keep that in mind. But congrats to Montclair State here. They are part of the ECAC here. And they get their first win over Mercy. Moving on to March 10th, Tuesday, we had 2 D3 programs that were playing some teams from Florida, and it was kind of a tough go. Penn State Schuylkill goes down to Daytona State on their spring break, I believe, and they lose 87-0. Similarly, Wittenberg plays St. Leo, and they fall 41-0 in a tough showing for those D3 programs. Going on to March 11th here, we have a number of games here. We have a little tri-meet between Marymount, Mercyhurst, and Allegheny, and this is how all those games go. I'm going to try to go in order. To start, Marymount would play Mercyhurst, which, by the way, is a D1 program, so I'm going to mostly talk about Marymount here, and they would go ahead and beat them 20-14, I would say a pretty close one here. Just looking at the stats, Kara Volmer, 5 of 8, 82 yards, no passing touchdowns, but Josenia Velez kind of had herself a day here. 3 of 6 for 69 yards and a passing touchdown. Also 114 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, who I think is obviously your playmaker of the game there. Their lead receiver was Samaya Barnes, who had 146-yard reception. Dakota Brubaker had 3 for 46, as well as Josiah Jasenia Velez having 3 for 46, and then Kayla Barr having the only receiving touchdown in that game. Defensively, Kayla Barr led with 3 flagpoles, and then Aaliyah Thrash had an interception, but no sacks for Marymount as they go ahead and sneak by Mercyhurst there to start. Following that, Marymount would go ahead and play Allegheny here, another D3 program, and beat them 40-6 pretty well. And once again, Jasenia Velez kind of having a decent day here. 2-2 for 25 passing yards and a touchdown. Not really passing the ball a whole much, which is definitely interesting. But also had 69 rushing yards on the ground. Samaya Barnes had another 55 and a touchdown. Brianna Lee, another 31-yard touchdown. Kayla Barr with another 19-yard touchdown there. Ryan Clark had your one receiving touchdown, which was a 1-yarder. And then Alex Veltri had a 2 reception 36-yard day, which actually led the team in receiving yards. Defensively, Barr led with 3 flagpoles. And then there was 1 sack from Tahira Semper, but no interceptions from Marymount. For Allegheny here, Victoria Badowski, 3 of 14, 46 yards and a touchdown. No picks, just kind of struggling throwing the ball here. Azalea Burnt did have 6 rushes for 13 yards, but really nothing going on there. Jasmine Fisher, 126-yard reception. Azalea Burnt, 120-yard receiving touchdown, but that is pretty much it. Jasmine Fisher led the team with 6 flagpoles as Allegheny falls to Marymount in this one. Following that, Marymount then plays Mercyhurst again, and they lose a very close one here. Second quarter touchdown by Mercyhurst would put them ahead here. Ellie Shaw would throw that passing touchdown to Cameron Mullally, and then Marymount would just not be able to score. And so that's how they would lose. They would lose 7-0 as this offense just couldn't get anything going here, really. Kara Volmer, 8 of 14, 53 yards, no interceptions, though. Rushing-wise, Velez led with 38 rushing yards, followed by Dakota Bright Brubaker with 29, but just could not punch anything in. Velez led with 5 receptions for 29 yards as Marymount's offense kind of struggled in this one. Defensively, no sacks, only 1 interception from Victoria Johnson, but that is pretty much it as they lose a tough one to Mercyhurst 7-0 after beating them originally. Then, funny enough, Marymount bounces back and they beat Allegheny by 64 here, just having a great game. A lot of that was because of Kara Volmer's 3 passing touchdowns, who was 6 of 10 for 72 yards, and then Jasenia Velez, 6 of 11 for 66 yards and a passing touchdown. Also had 3 rushing touchdowns in this one. Velez, once again, probably your playmaker of the game. Velez actually kind of went off here. 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns on 3 receptions for 49 yards here. So she had a passing touchdown, multiple receiving touchdowns, and multiple rushing touchdowns. Might be the first player in the country to have a passing touchdown and then multiple rushing and receiving in a game, which is kind of crazy there. But you know, she did her thing. Kayla Barr also had a 14-yard receiving touchdown. Brianna Lee had a receiving touchdown and also had 2 receptions for 12 yards. And then defensively, it was Isabella Silvestri who had 3 flagpoles that led the team. And then the defense kind of popped off here. Kayla Barr, Stephanie Braun, Morgan Lester, and Naima, excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, Thomas, all had interceptions for Marymount. For Allegheny here, some struggles here. Victoria Badowski, 4 interceptions, 53 passing yards, 9 of 25 here. Her lead receiver was Jasmine Fisher with 5 for 43. And then Fisher was actually their lead flag puller as well with 5 flagpoles. Rosa Monarch had a sack, but not enough, not nearly enough to go ahead and beat Marymount. And then, last but not least here, Allegheny would play Mercyhurst, and they would lose to them 40-0. And then I believe there was a game that was postponed or canceled, but that was all the games played in that tri-meet right there, or I guess tri-match. But the last game of the day, Wittenberg played Warner, and they would lose by a lot here, 90-0. Gabby Moore, 12 of 30, 47 yards, 3 picks here. Also sacked 10 times, which is crazy. Abby Holman, 8 for 20, Carly Moore 2 for 17, but nothing really going their way. Cadence Boyd was their lead flag puller with 3 as they lose a really tough one, really tough one to Warner 90-0. Moving on to the next day, we have March 12th here. That would be the Thursday, and we would go ahead and see Immaculata playing St. Joseph's here and beating them 18-7. At halftime, it was 7-6. Immaculata behind by 1, but they would go ahead and come back here early in the second half. Eliana Satskowski, intercepted a deep St. Joseph's pass here to stop a drive that could have given them a 2-score lead. And then you had Jacqueline Molini scoring twice for Immaculata. She would first find the end zone on a pass from Devin Cosgrove, and then she would break a rushing play here, a counter play for a long touchdown to go ahead and give Immaculata the lead. Following that, go ahead and fast forward to the fourth quarter. Tiara Lawler would intercept a pass here and return it for a pick 6. And that would pretty much wrap this one up as Immaculata's defense, a big second half here, holding St. Joseph scoreless in that second half to win 18-7. That's a big time win for them here after a little bit of a rough first half. So shout out them. And then I would probably say, actually, just looking at this and what happened, your playmaker of the game from that game for Immaculata would have to probably be Jacqueline Molini for the 2 touchdowns she did score here to kind of get them back into the game and with the lead as well. But a great effort from the whole team for sure as they go ahead and tally on another win. I believe that goes ahead and moves them to 3-0 so far on the season. Now, moving on to March 13th, we have 2 games here, including, I want to say, the only game from the from the Midwest, or one of 2 games from the Midwest from this last week, and that would be Illinois Wesleyan versus North Park here, where Illinois Wesleyan, building on a successful week here last week where they got a pair of wins to go 2-0. They get another one to go 3-0 to start the season, their first one ever, as they beat North Park 27-0 here. Emma Caniglia with another playmaker of the game type of performance. Last week's playmaker of the week here in this game against North Park, 15 of 32, 173 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Also add on another 52 yards for the young freshman as she is cooking to start the season for Illinois Wesleyan. Receiving wise, Lily Greenfield led all receivers with 3 receptions, 60 yards, and 2 touchdowns there. Natalia Stallings led the team in receptions with 7 for 49 and a touchdown. Brielle Wisser-Banowski, hopefully I said that right, 2 for 41, and then Malin Nunez, 2 for 22 and a receiving touchdown. Defensively for Illinois Wesleyan, Nakila Mason, 10 flagpoles, 4 sacks in this game. Leah Glover right behind her with another sack. No interceptions for this team, but they did keep North Park scoreless throughout the game. Janiah Greenfield, 12 of 28, 99 yards, just couldn't get going. Did get sacked 5 times, so that really disrupted what they had going on in that one. Yamil Belmontes here, 1 12-yard rush. Ashley Wilson, 3 rushes for 11 yards. Not too much going on the ground either for them. Ava Balmaceda, 4 for 40, and Jayla Johnson, 3 for 29, as they were mostly contained. And then defensively, Amber Brock led with 7 flagpoles, no sacks or interceptions, as North Park drops a tough one to Illinois Wesleyan, 27-0. And then the other game here was on the West Coast. Redlands falls to Arizona State's club team, 21-7. Now, moving on here to Saturday, we have a lot of games here for Saturday, or at least a decent amount. We have Eastern playing Neumann, and Eastern continues their dominance, beating Neumann 33-0 here. Kira Green with another great performance, 20 of 24, 211 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick. Also a rushing touchdown and 10 rushing yards there. That is your playmaker of the game. Kyla Massenberg doing her thing as well. 6 rushes, 32 yards for them. No receptions, which is definitely interesting. But as far as receiving goes, Damien Moyer, 4 receptions, 58 yards, 2 touchdowns. Molly Shellpepper, 4 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown. Her first career touchdown. Congrats to Colorado's very own Molly Shellpepper for that one right there against Neumann. That's definitely going to be one to remember. At least her first offensive touchdown, that is. Ayanna Ridgway, 4 receptions, 42 yards, and then Jariah Johnson, 3 for 29, and a touchdown as this offense continues to roll. Defensively, though, they're also rolling as well. 4 sacks total for this team, led by Brielle Hippolyte here, who had 4 flag pulls and 3 sacks. Jariah Johnson co-led in flag pulls with 4 as well. Kyla Massenberg had a sack. Jariah Johnson also had an interception here, which was one of 6 interceptions that this team had. Molly Shellpepper, 3 interceptions in this game, almost doubling her season amount. Now 7 interceptions on the season, as she definitely leads the team in picks right now. Dominic Geiger, 1 interception, and Damien Moyer with another interception, as this team is rolling and on fire to start. Neumann here, Ava Valente, 14 of 31, 133 yards. Just a tough go, 6 interceptions in this game. Receiving-wise, Kayla Maish, 4 for 52. Shannon Duffy, 5 for 49 here, as they were your lead receivers. And then defensively, Yanacia Thomas, 5 flag pulls. Ariel Noble and Nyla Naheem with a sack. And then Anasia Harmon had an interception, but just not enough offensively. Too many mistakes on offense to win this game, as Eastern wins 33-0. And it is worth saying that it was 13-0 for a lot of it. At half, it was 7-0, but a 20-point fourth quarter by Eastern would allow them to pull away in a big way in this one over Neumann. Moving on here, Emmanuel playing a number of teams here, Florida Gateway and Mars Hill, in both games going very different. They would lose to Florida Gateway, kind of by a lot here. They would lose 59-0. Here are the stats from that one. Lillian Stevenson, 26 of 48, 130 yards. Only 1 pick here. Lead receivers is Gwen Carter and Gianna Brown, which is no surprise here. Carter with 6 for 49 and Brown with 6 for 47, but no touchdowns. The offense, took care of the football, but just could not finish drives, which is honestly not the worst thing against a team like Florida Gateway, but just not enough. Jimmy Spivey led with 8 flag pulls, and then Gianna Brown also had an interception in a tough loss to Florida Gateway, but then they would go ahead and jump out to a big win against D2 Mars Hill, 42-14 here. Lillian Stevenson, a game, 372 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 pick here, but just playing lights out. Gianna Brown, 6 for 80 and 2 touchdowns. LZ Baker, 3 for 73 and a touchdown. Sydney Stoker, 9 for 72 and a touchdown. And then Shane Cooper Riley, 4 for 51 and a touchdown. Demoya Flowers also had an 11-yard receiving touchdown, as the wealth was spread in this one. Defensively, for Emmanuel, Spivey led with 8 flag pulls, and then Gwen Carter had an interception, as this Emmanuel team dominated in this one. A tough loss to Florida Gateway, but a quick bounce back with a 42-12 win over Mars Hill. Moving on here, Eastern plays Holy Family, and they win big, as Eastern is looking like a buzzsaw right now. 35-0 here, really pulling away with the 13-point fourth quarter. Kira Green, 30 of 41, 248 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. Also 63 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Another playmaker of the game type of performance. Damien Moyer, 9 receptions, 68 yards and a touchdown. Jariah Johnson, 5 for 53 and a touchdown. Elena Reapin, 5 for 38. Adriana Somerset, 3 for 33. And then Molly Shellpepper with another receiving touchdown, 3 for 30 in this game. On defense for them, Damien Moyer with 4 flag poles, tied with Brielle Hippolyte, who also had 4 as well. And You also have Jariah Johnson with an interception, Elena Repen with an interception, and then Molly Shellpepper with another 2 interceptions here. I believe right now she has 9 interceptions through 4 games, and I'm pretty sure that leads the conference in interceptions. 9 interceptions through 4 games is absolutely insane here, as she has to be the Atlantic East interception leader right now, and could be going for a record here. I need to double check what the record is, but could be going for a record here. For Holy Family, some struggles here. Alice Davis, 8 of 20, 42 yards and 4 picks. She also had 89 rushing yards, but nothing else going for this defense or offense outside of that, as the Eastern defense was suffocating. Their lead receiver was Alexis Tina McLeod with 1 16-yard reception. That is it. Defensively, Kylie Cooley led with 10 flagpoles. Alana Clavel Lopez had an interception. But that is it, as Eastern undefeated as they take care of Holy Family 35-0. Now, there would be a game here played as well between Neumann and Holy Family, but I wanted to save that for later, so that'll be an individual segment after this one. Moving on here, let's go ahead and go to the Midwest real quick here. We have Purdue Northwest playing Marion. This would be a battle between 2 first-year programs, as Purdue Northwest would unfortunately go ahead and beat D3 Marion here 25-6. For Marion, the first touchdown in program history would come from Holly Goodwin, who would throw this one to Kendall Graves, and that would be your first one there. But not too much going on after that, as they would unfortunately drop this one. Looking at the stats, though, Daniela Shanaim, I want to say, 7 of 14 for 42 yards. Holly Goodwin, 7 of 17 for 25 yards, a touchdown and a pick, but not too much going on there. Receiving wise, Reagan Montello led with 5 receptions for 31 yards. You obviously have Kendall Graves, who was 2 of 13 for a touchdown. Francis Ivers 3 for 11, and Ava Krieger 3 for 10 in that first game for them. And then defensively, it was Clara Riverna Ragianti, I want to say, who had 6 flagpoles. Ava Krieger had a sack. Anna Riley had 2 sacks. Holly Goodwin and Emily Eastham each had an interception in this game, but just not enough to go ahead and beat D2 Purdue Northwest, as they fall 25-6. Worth noting that it was 7-6 at halftime, but Purdue Northwest had a great 18-point half to pull away there. Moving on here, Keene would go ahead and play Mercy and beat them 20 to, I think it was just 20-0. Yep, in a game here. Here are the stats for Keene. Jazreel Miranda, 8 of 20 well, 83 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick here. Erica Mercedes, 9 for 76 rushing yards. Receiving wise, Cesaria Thompson had 2 for 44 and a touchdown. Erica Mercedes, 2 for 20 and a touchdown. And Sayla Leffler, 3 for 14 and a touchdown. Erica Mercedes, I would say your playmaker of the game, who had a receiving touchdown as well as your leader in rushing yards for them. Defensively, you had Erica Mercedes with an interception, Sayla Leffler with an interception, Dasani Nunez with an interception, and then Mercedes actually led with 4 flagpoles for this team. For Mercy, not too much going on here. Caitlin Conklin, 4 of 17, 33 yards and 3 picks. She also had 37 rushing yards, and then her lead receiver was Madison Brefka on a 1-yard, 12-yard reception here. Defensively, Rebecca McClure had an interception for them. And then Madison Brefka and Anna Palmieri led with 5 flagpoles each, but just not enough, as Keene takes down Mercy 20-0. And then the last game on Saturday, Redlands beats Arizona's club flag football team 40-2. Alrighty, now moving on to our last day, Sunday, March 15th. To start, we have Hendricks facing off with Huntington here. Huntington goes ahead and gets a big win over the first-year program, 32-6 here. Was a little close in the first half, 13-6 at halftime, but Huntington scored 19 unanswered points to go ahead and put them away. Let's go ahead and look at the stats here, starting with their quarterback, Kennedy Young, who has had a pretty good season season so far. 169 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, also 51 rushing yards and another rushing touchdown to add. Their leader in receptions was Kyler Rome with 32 yards on 5 receptions, And then you have Deasia Williams, who had 3 for 49 and a touchdown. Keelis Russell had 2 for 25. Alyssa Lanos had 2 for 20 and a touchdown. And then Sincere Johns had 1 15-yard touchdown for them. And then let me see if I could find defensive stats. I could not as of right now. Sorry, so no defensive stats as of right now. For Hendricks, though, Brooklyn Rowe, 16 of 22, 126 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Ava Hansen also got in there, 5 of 13 for 33 yards, but threw an interception, which is unfortunate there. Not too much going on the ground, but through the air, you had Lindy Bryan, who had 8 receptions for 57 yards, Natalie Edmondson, 4 for 53 and a touchdown, and Bella Cates with 3 for 28, followed by Riley Skeef with 3 for 20 here. But not too much going for Hendricks, as Huntington gets another big win here, 32-6. And then the last 2 games of the week here on the D3 level, we had St. Joseph's University here in New York at Long Island. So St. Joseph's, Long Island, they would play both Mount St. Mary College, not to be confused with Mount St. Mary's, and then would also play College at Old Westbury here. And they would win both the games against Mount St. Mary's here. They would win 21-0. Alexa Marquise, I want to say, accounted for 2 long touchdown runs in the first half that were both 25-plus yard runs here. I believe she plays quarterback for them. And that first touchdown came after an explosive 40-yard return by Addison Della Porta to go ahead and set that one up. Defensively, obviously, they had the shutout, so that was pretty massive there. And then I want to say, actually, the first touchdown in St. Joseph's Long Island history was a pass. It looks like an RPO that was thrown to Eichner, it looks like, and then Alexa Marquise had those other touchdowns. So basically sealed this one at 21-0. And then they would get an even bigger win against Old Westbury here, 47-6 here. Alexa Marquise had multiple touchdowns on the ground and through the air, including a 5-yard pass to Callie Eichner, and then obviously several conversions as well. Defensively, I think it's Justison, had a pick 6, which was right before halftime to make it 41-0, and then another interception later in the game. Nora Williams, Megan Erdman, Kelly Cunner, Madison Caputo, all had scores throughout this game as well as Trista Buck, who had a 20-yard rushing touchdown. And then Andrea Samarco had a touchdown, it looks like, as well. As St. Joseph's Long Island has a good start to their first ever season, or at least I want to say this is their first official season. Technically, I want to say last year was more of a club season, and then this year they go ahead and get their first couple wins here, 2-0 to start the year. All right, now let me go ahead and recap this Neumann versus Holy Family game from Saturday, March 14th here. This was actually a pretty close game, so I wanted to make sure I gave it the attention that it deserves here. But let's go ahead and get this one started to start the first quarter in this game. Not too much would get going. Actually, both offenses kind of struggling a little bit as it would remain scoreless. But in the second quarter, Holy Family would go ahead and get on the board through a pick 6 from Morgan Sims here. They would also get the PAT that would give them the early 7-0 lead, which is what they would take going into the second half. And in the second half here, it really wasn't until the third quarter for Neumann where they would score through an Ava Valente to Kayla, I think it's Maish, or at least that is what I'm gonna go with. But you'd go ahead and find her for a 15-yarder and the PAT after that to go ahead and tie this game at 7-7. Fast forward a couple drives here, Neumann gets the ball back after not allowing Holy Family to score. And Valente, coming alive here in the second half, finds Shannon Duffy for a 5-yard touchdown to cap that drive. And that would actually give them the first lead of the game at 13-7. They would not get the PAT, though, after that. Now, Holy Family would actually then go ahead and respond here. Their quarterback, I believe it's Alice Davis, would go ahead and complete a touchdown pass here. Would go ahead and, complete a touchdown pass here to Morgan Sims, and that would go ahead and force overtime. They would not be able to get the PAT, so that would end up forcing overtime. And in OT here, Holy Family would go ahead and score thanks to a Davis rushing touchdown, but not get the PAT. And luckily for Neumann, they would go ahead and get the score here. Ava Valente finding Shannon Duffy one more time to tie the game, and then they would go ahead and get the conversion as well to win this game in overtime, a thriller 20-19. Now looking at the stats here, Ava Valente, I would say your playmaker of the game here, did throw that early pick six, but would come back in a big way. 19 of 37, 219 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, also 122 rushing yards on 23 attempts, right, but still productive. Receiving-wise, Shannon Duffy, 6 for 83 and 2 touchdowns. Chloe Ballou, 4 for 42. And Kayla Maish, 5 for 42 and that 1 touchdown. Also, Tasia Gaskins, 2 for 27 there. And then defensively for Neumann, Marie Berry led with 8 flagpoles. Also, 4 of those were for a loss. And then, Yanacia Thomas, who had a sack, and then Chloe Ballou with an interception on defense. For Holy Family, they really fought in this game, but just could not quite close this one out, despite having the early advantage. They'd end up playing 2 quarterbacks. Alice Davis, 7 of 9, 113 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Also had 12 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. That was on 9 rushing attempts. Then you also have Samira Anderson, 4 of 7 for 23 yards and 6 rushing yards there. And then receiving wise, Morgan Sims, 3 for 58 and a touchdown. Alexis Tina McLeod, 2 for 57. And then I think Caitlin Cannon was the next highest receiver with 3 for 18. But really, honestly, when you look at this, not too much going for the offense. They struggled to move up and down the field, which it felt like they struggled to move up and down the field for the majority of this game. Gotta remember, one of those scores was a pick 6, and then the other one was a score on offense in regulation, and then a score in OT, which obviously they're on the other side of the field when that happens. And then on defense, Morgan Sims, 9 flagpoles and interceptions. She kind of had herself a game here. Probably would have been their playmaker of the game if they would have won, but unfortunately that did not happen. And then defensively as well, for Holy Family, Alanis Clavel Lopez and Kieran Cusick each had 2 sacks there for a total of 4 in this game, which is not enough for Holy Family, as they could not quite get it done here. Holy Family, I believe, winless on the season. And then on the other hand, you have Neumann, who now goes on and improves to 3-1 on the season.
What is going on, folks? This is Gino with the Playmaker's Corner podcast, and I got y'all this week with the recap on what happened in the Division I, Division II, and junior college games here in Week 4 of the 2026 Women's College Flag Football season. Pretty much every team has their seasons up and running now that we are getting into the middle of March, and there's tons of action to cover in this segment, so let's not waste any more time and get right to the recaps. We're actually going to start things off here with one of the most exciting games that went down here in Week 5. I'm talking about the game that was between number 12 ranked Ferrum and number 17 ranked Barton. Number 12 Ferrum established themselves as the current top team in the Conference Carolinas after handing number 17 Barton their first loss of the season in a nail-biting 37-33 game that saw the best of both squads. Barton was leading the vast majority of this game, even leading 33-24 heading into the fourth quarter, but Ferrum went ahead and put up 13 unanswered points in the fourth quarter to take this win away from Barton. Ferrum's star freshman QB Payson Shreve had a fantastic game, going 43 for 55 for 439 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Shreve's leading wide receiver was Macy Taylor, who had a ridiculous 14 receptions for 163 yards and a touchdown. Samantha Pitzer went crazy as well with 8 receptions for 99 yards and a team-leading 2 touchdowns. Brianna Kimmons also had a receiving touchdown, and she was the only player with a rushing touchdown. And then Jaden Hires had a receiving touchdown, and then 5 pulls and a sack on defense. Also on defense here, Samantha Pitzer had an interception, and Malaya Latma Tonga led the team with 9 flag pulls. For Barton here, Sawyer Rigdon put up some big numbers with 317 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception on 24 for 45 passing. Definitely not her most precise performance as far as completion goes, but she still put on a show to keep number 17 Barton in this game. Valerie Angie Bata, sorry if I mispronounced that there, was the leading receiver with 9 receptions for 117 yards and a touchdown. Saren Merritt was right behind her with 6 receptions for 102 yards and a touchdown of her own. And then Deja Reed also nearly joined the 100-yard club in that game with 8 receptions for 98 yards and a touchdown. On defense for Barton, Mariah White had 8 pulls along with 2 sacks, and Alexa Wheaton caught the only interception. Another nail-biter this week came from a game where Arizona Christian nearly dethroned the current Queens of the Desert, the number 14 ranked Nevada State Scorpions, but Nevada State held on with a 28-26 win. Nevada State's QB, Kaylee Phillips, was running all over the place, finishing with 12 carries for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns. She also went 14 for 27 for 203 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Her leading receiver was Brooklyn Hill, who finished with 6 receptions for 101 yards and a touchdown. And then former Kansas Wesleyan Coyote Soraya Tafua had a very dynamic game with 5 receptions for 55 yards and then 6 flag pulls and 2 tackles for loss on defense. Also on defense here, Tyrielle Cole, sorry if I mispronounced that there, had an interception, and Courtney Funk had 3 tackles for loss and a sack. Nevada State will remain undefeated so far here in their first year as a program. Keeping things rolling with some more close games in Week 5, number 18 ranked Saddleback barely squeaked by Golden West by a score of 7-6 to remain undefeated. No stats in this game, but right now Saddleback is 14-0 on the year with some huge games coming up against Irvine Valley and Ventura within the next couple of weeks. This team is definitely battle-tested and up for the challenge though. Looking at another close game here out of the California junior colleges was Cypress handing number 23 ranked Irvine Valley their second loss of the year after taking them down 25-18. No stats in that game either here, but it will be very, very hard to rank Cypress, Ventura, or Irvine Valley here now, since all of them could beat each other on any given day. And next here, while it was just a scrimmage and not a full-blown game, Norco College did get a nice win over Simpson University, 13-12. Scrimmage or no scrimmage, that is simply a huge win for this Norco team to be able to take down NAIA programs like that. Next up here, I want to highlight the 2 matchups between Mercyhurst and Marymount that went down here in Week 5. Mercyhurst went ahead and went 1-1 in the games between the 2025 Atlantic East champs, losing the first game in program history by a score of 20-14 before shutting out Marymount 7-0 to get revenge in their next matchup later on that day. In their first game in program history versus Marymount, dual threat QB Ellie Shaw had 10 carries for 69 yards and a touchdown. She didn't eclipse 100 yards passing in this one, but she did get her first career passing touchdown of the season in this one to Goddess Santos. Santos finished with 3 receptions for 79 yards and a touchdown, and all 3 of those statistics led the team. On defense here, Madison Newsel, sorry if I mispronounced that there, led the team with 8 flag pulls, and then Katherine Johnson had 3 tackles for loss. Mercyhurst then bounced back quite nicely in their next game against Marymount with a 7-0 win. Ellie Shaw threw the lone touchdown in this game to Cameron Mullally, sorry if I mispronounced that there, who had a team-leading 4 receptions for 34 yards and a touchdown. On defense, the most valuable playmaker of this game is going to go to Katherine Johnson, who led the team with 9 flag pulls, a ridiculous 6 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. Johnson was a massive part of that shutout win, without a doubt. And the last close game here in the week, we have Huntington, who took down Division I Alabama State by a score of 18-14. Alabama State forced 4 turnovers on defense, and 2 of those were caught by Sanea Howard, and 2 more were caught by Shelby Schaefer, who had a sack as well. Despite this awesome performance on defense, they struggled to put up points on offense, though. Keona Westerland caught a 68-yard touchdown pass, and then Jania Oliver led the team with 6 receptions for 72 yards. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of the landscape here in Week 5 for the Division I, Division II, and junior college teams. Starting on March 10th, number 18 ranked Saddleback shut out El Camino 21-0. No box score in that one. And then in the last game on March 10th, Cypress smacked down Long Beach State 52-0. Mia Cabral went 10 for 18 for 154 yards and 3 touchdowns, while also adding 1 rushing touchdown. The leading receiver and probably the playmaker of the game here was Devonee Ray, who had 5 receptions for 217 yards and 2 touchdowns. She also ran for a 14-yard touchdown. And folks, she was not done there. She went ahead and went crazy on defense with 8 flag pulls and 6 sacks. That is simply an unbelievable game from Ray, and I cannot believe that she did that on both sides of the ball in the same game. Moving along here to the games on March 11th, we have number 6 Florida Gateway, who absolutely destroyed their rival number 9 Daytona State by a score of 51-7. No box score in this one, but it is so disappointing that Daytona State was not able to put up a better fight here. It just comes to show that Florida Gateway is simply so far ahead of the other JUCO teams here competing for the JUCO National Championship. But next game here, we have number 12 Ferrum. They lost another matchup here to number 3 Milligan for the second week in a row, this time by a score of 48-7. This was definitely Ferrum's worst game so far. The main highlight would be Jaden Hires getting 15 receptions for 100 yards. Ferrum recovered nicely, though, in the next game here with a ridiculous 99-0 win over Radford. Payson Shreve went 10 for 16 for 207 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception, 2 rushing touchdowns as well there. And then Malaya Latma Tonga even got in the mix, completed 2 out of 3 passes with both of those receptions going for touchdowns. And then 6 different receivers caught a touchdown in this one. And on defense, 6 different players caught an interception. Just a huge game here for Ferrum and a very nice bounce back win. Next up now we have Mercyhurst, who got their first win in program history with a 40-0 win over Allegheny. Sorry if I mispronounced that there. Ellie Shaw went 7 for 12 for 107 yards and 3 touchdowns and 1 interception. Goddess Santos was the leading receiver once again with 3 receptions for 75 yards and a touchdown. On defense, Rosa Monarch had 3 tackles for loss and a sack. And then Victoria Badowski and Amaya Brooks both caught an interception on defense. We are now on to March 12th, and we are going to first highlight Norco getting a nice 18-0 shutout win over El Camino. No stats in that game, but we're going to keep it here on the West Coast. Santa Barbara smacked down East Los Angeles 32-18. No stats there. And last game here on March 12th, Ventura went ahead and destroyed Cal Lutheran by a score of 45-8. No box score here, but Ventura's next game will be to see who between them and Irvine Valley will be ranked in Week 7. That game is going to be a must-watch for anyone who lives in that area. Now, on Friday, March 13th, number 9 Daytona State bounced back with a 27-0 win over an NAIA program, that being Brewton Parker. They will be dropping in the rankings for sure after that loss to Florida Gateway, but a win like this definitely helps their confidence after what happened in that Gateway game. No box score there, so we're going to move on here to Saturday, March 14th. Number 6 Florida Gateway completely dismantled Emmanuel by a score of 59-0. Martha Edwards went 13 for 16 for 242 yards and 6 touchdowns for the Timberwolves. And Caitlin Jewell went 7 for 9 for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns for Florida Gateway. Their leading receiver was Nichelle Brown, who had 11 receptions for 203 yards and 3 touchdowns. Kaya Vance had 6 receptions for 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. And finally here, Layla West had 4 receptions for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. Nichelle Brown also led the team with 7 flag pulls. Poetry August had an interception, and Mackenzie Moody had 2 sacks. Emmanuel bounced back, though, in their next game with a 42-12 win over Mars Hill. Lillian Stevenson had 6 passing touchdowns and 372 yards on 30 of 48 passing. 5 different receivers caught a touchdown pass, with Gianna Brown leading the way with 6 receptions for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. On defense, Gwen Carter caught an interception, and Jamise Spivey led the team in flag pulls with 8. For Mars Hill, Cecilia Hall went 23 for 42 for 175 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, and then she also led the team with 9 flag pulls on defense. Her leading receiver on offense was Mary Lou Sunis, who had 3 receptions for 57 yards and a touchdown. And then Sunis also had an interception on the defensive side of the ball as well. Holy Family falls to 0-4 on the year so far after losing a tough 20-19 game in overtime to Neumann, and then they lost 35-0 to Eastern as well. No box score in either of those games here, but Lise McRae is back after a 2-week sabbatical. They went ahead and destroyed King University by a score of 67-6. Both QBs had a great game for Lee's. Mackenzie Hicks went 17 for 23 for 235 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception. And then Ava Rivera went 8 for 13 for 141 yards and 2 touchdowns. 5 different receivers caught a touchdown, with Natalia Hernandez de Leon leading the team with 4 receptions for 97 yards and a touchdown. Tammy Chatwood caught 3 passes for 82 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then she also added 2 sacks on defense. And then finally here, Kennedy Van Noy caught 6 passes for 77 yards for 2 touchdowns and 5 flag pulls on defense with 2 interceptions there as well. Huge game from Van Noy. And Mackenzie Walker led the team on defense with 11 flag pulls and an interception. For King University, the main highlight here is going to be Colorado's very own Alyssa Ramos with a whopping 20 receptions for 150 yards. That is the most in a game so far this year by any receiver, as far as I know. Ramos is clearly the X factor that this team looks to on offense and defense to make plays. And oh yeah, speaking of defense, she also caught an interception on that side of the ball, while also being second on the team in flag pulls. Next up here, we have Lise McRae, and they also got a chance at the preseason favorites to win the Conference Carolinas, that being the number 13 ranked Wingate Bulldogs. This game was also consisting of numerous players that either attended or committed to play under Coach Schlager at William Woods before he departed for Wingate last year. A lot of different storylines in this game, obviously, but it was Wingate who won this one by a score of 30-19. There was no Sailor Swanson in this game for Wingate, so number 13 Wingate started off with Janelle Francis at QB, and she balled out, going 16 for 30 for 152 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then she also added 83 yards on 12 attempts with 2 rushing touchdowns. Oh, and then an interception on defense as well. The leading receiver here was Yvonne Brussel with 5 receptions for 77 yards and a touchdown. And then she also added a sack on defense. Also on defense here, Addison Cadwell led the team with 9 flag pulls, and Kaylee Montalvo caught an interception. For Lise McCray, Mackenzie Hicks had a solid game, going 23 for 36 for 270 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Her leading receiver was once again Natalia Hernandez de Leon with 10 receptions for 167 yards and a touchdown. And then on defense here for De Leon, she had 2 sacks and an interception. She is definitely doing everything she can to try and help Lise McCray to win these games. Next up here for number 13 Wingate, they also smacked down King University this weekend by a score of 41-0. This might as well have been the Janelle Francis game, as she went 25 for 38 for 169 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then Francis added 148 rushing yards with 3 more touchdowns to make it 5 total on the game. Her leading receiver was Yvonne Brussel once again with 6 receptions for 48 yards and a touchdown. And then you guys are going to want to hear this. She had 10 flag pulls, 7 tackles for loss, and 6 sacks on this game, on top of being the leading receiver on offense. That is ridiculous value that Brussel brings to this team. And yeah, that is tied for the most in a game this season on top of that. Also on defense here for Wingate, Alana Placide, sorry if I mispronounced that there, led the team with 11 flag pulls and an interception. And then Addison Cadwell caught an interception as well. For King, Alyssa Ramos had 9 flag pulls and 3 tackles for loss, and Samantha Lee went 22 for 37 for 117 yards and 2 interceptions. Purdue Northwest took down Marion for their first win in program history in their first game in program history by a score of 25-6. Purdue really struggled to pass the ball in this one, but they thrived everywhere else. QB Marilyn Myrick threw for under 100 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception, but she also added 2 rushing touchdowns. On defense for Purdue Northwest, Shine Lipscomb had an incredible debut with a team-leading 11 flag pulls, 7 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. Also on defense, they caught 3 total interceptions as a team. Number 12 Ferrum in their last game of the week destroyed Mount Olive by a score of 73-6. Payson Shreve had 4 touchdowns and 2 interceptions and 186 yards on 19 of 33 passing, plus 69 yards rushing and another touchdown. And Shreve wasn't done there. She went ahead and caught 2 interceptions on defense to go ahead and add some more value there. Her leading receiver was Samantha Pitzer, who finished with 6 receptions for 70 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. Also on defense here, Malaya Latma Tonga had 5 flag pulls, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks, and then an interception as well. Gracious White led the team with 6 flag pulls, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, and an interception in this win here for Ferrum. Next up here, Pratt Community College went ahead and took down North Central Missouri by a score of 40-6. No box score in that game. But in the last game from Saturday, March 14th, Irvine Valley blew out Long Beach State by a score of 45-12. Also no box score there, but let's go ahead and move to the final games of the week here from March 15th on Sunday. And it was Post who won their first 2 games in program history this weekend in their games versus Bryant and Stratton and Roxbury. They smacked down Roxbury 53-7, and then they got a very nice win over Bryant and Stratton by a score of 26-6. In the Roxbury game, they had 2 QBs pass for 2 touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown for each, and those players being Anaya Booker and Delia Kotsaftis. Sorry if I mispronounced that there. Booker also caught an interception on defense. The leading receiver was Hannah Van Cees with 2 receptions for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. On defense, Rihanna Boland caught 2 interceptions. In the Brighton-Stratton game, they ran for 179 yards as a team, with Hannah Solis leading the team with 64 yards rushing. On defense here, Rihanna Boland caught 3 interceptions for post. That is going to wrap things up here for the recap here for games in the Division II, Division I, and junior college games in Week 5. This is Gino with the Playmaker's Corner podcast, and I will see you all next week.
What's up, everybody? It is your host for this segment, Kodey Stauffer, talking about the NAIA and all the action that happened this past week. There was a lot of big games, a lot of crazy games and upsets, and I'm here to get it all to you. And it started off with an upset actually on March 9th, which is where our weeks begin on Mondays through Sundays. And this very first game was between the University of St. Francis and Weber. Now, Weber came into this game ranked number 7 in the country, according to our PMC poll, and they were taking on St. Francis, who was at 21 coming into this contest. So Weber started off the scoring as Luzariana Herrera found Riley Bolser, star athlete, to cap off a 10-play drive and take a 6-0 lead in the first quarter. But Reyes of St. Francis would rush for a touchdown and convert on the PAT to help the University of St. Francis lead 7-6 at halftime. But Reyes would continue her role and run into the end zone again, this time capping off a 66-yard drive, and the Cougars would convert on the PAT, putting them up 14-6, but that is still only a 1-score lead, and the Warriors would get a massive play as Haley Mole would find Riley Bolser, who would convert a 59-yard touchdown here, but the PAT would not be converted, and so they would still trail 14-12, and the University of St. Francis, this is a newer program. Would they be able to outlast the veteran experience of Weber? Well, in short, the answer is yes, as Reyes would find Nina Camahill on her first reception and would put up the Cougars for good, 21-12. Gianna Reyes would have nearly a perfect game, going 33 for 38 for 249 yards, a passing touchdown as well as 2 rushing touchdowns, completing passes to more receivers than she had in completions, with 7 different receivers, both all getting looks. Witherspoon and Gardner both had over 80 yards. And then Wilma had 13 receptions here, really helping bring this game over the top. And the Cougars defense also came to play with 3 interceptions. Witherspoon and Madison Myers-Rabides here getting a pair of interceptions as well. On Weber's front, they had a lot of snaps between both quarterbacks, and Herrera struggled to string together completions, just getting over 50% and getting 1 touchdown to 1 turnover. Meanwhile, Mole had the really big completion to Bolser, but however went 13 of 16 with 2 of her incompletions being 2 interceptions, really putting them out of this game. Now, Bolser still bolsters this lineup for Weber here on both sides of the ball, quietly having an MVP-level season, recording 12 receptions for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns, and leading the defense with 16 tackles for 1 loss. Meanwhile, defensively, Kalia Gator also had 2 sacks and 3 tackles for loss, but this defense was just allowing way too many completions to halt this game entirely, and so Weber gets upset by the University of St. Francis 21-12. The other Monday action had Warner beating Siena Heights 66-0. Hutchinson, 10 touchdowns, 383 yards, 3 to Avalon, 2 to Jess, 2 to Anna Vincenzini, and much more. But that's kind of just Warner score recaps, and you'll tell as on the 10th, the big news is that the first touchdown scored on Warner all season was from the University of St. Francis, as Gianna Reyes found Harmony Walker, and this offense totaled 231 yards, but were just completely outmatched here as Hutchinson threw 7 touchdowns, 1 to Finley, 2 to Lauber, 3 to Avalon, and 1 to Vincenzini. Now, in other action here, Siena Heights would play Weber, and Weber would just outpace Siena Heights from the gate, taking the first half 21-6 into the second quarter and a 34-18 lead into halftime, where the game would slow down dramatically. The Weber defense in this game was more opportunative and forced mistakes. They had 6 sacks. Gator had a hat trick. Bolser, Bonelli, and Edwards all get an interception, with 2 of those going back to the house, and the offense was clicking as well. Herrera would complete 4 touchdowns, and Sigmundi would catch 2 of them. Meanwhile, for Siena Heights, Adrian Griffin would rack up a crazy 12 receptions, but 3 other receivers would catch touchdowns from Saunders and Kiyomura Dunn. But overall, it was just a trying day for the offense. Siena Heights had a couple of tournaments coming up where the competition they faced from this past week with this IFFA thing should help prepare them for success down the stretch of the season. In other action on Tuesday, we had Southwestern outlasting Kodey 19-0. Kennedy Hayes went 21 of 36 for 180 yards and 3 scores, but was intercepted twice. Meanwhile, Viviana Solis in her return had 8 receptions for 96 yards and a touchdown. Defensively, Southwestern was all over it this game as they had 9 tackles for loss. Kennedy Wesley had 4 of those and 2 sacks, and Little had an interception. For Kodey Ziglotali, I'm butchering that, but Bots here was doing what she could on defense with 11 tackles and 2 sacks to try and keep the Comets in the game, but ultimately would fall short as the offense just did not get rolling. Hope would defeat Simpson 52-13. Anahe Morales threw 2 and ran for 2 and also caught a 63-yard touchdown, making her impact felt everywhere. Meanwhile, Nia Gile tossed 3 scores. Madison Powell had herself a game for Hope International with 108 receiving yards and 4 scores on 7 receptions. Defensively, she had 2 interceptions and 2 pass breakups, taking one of those picks to the house. Now, it was a rough first matchup for Simpson, but they would have a much stronger showing later on. On 3/11, for those who celebrate, shout out to 3/11 the band and Nebraska flag football. But anyways, Warner would start off the day with a 90-0 victory. Hutchinson 10 touchdowns, Avalon 3, Just 2, Vincenzini 2, Thomas 2. That's just kind of how I run through this at this point. But there'd be a really big game between Baker and Ottawa here. That would be a huge KCAC matchup here to determine who would have sole possession of that KCAC kind of regular season lead right now while we wait for a Kansas Wesleyan game between either of these 2 squads. But both teams would be off to a painfully slow start as there was no scoring through the entire first half. But in the second half, that would be interrupted by who else other than Alyssa Linkus. She would catch a pass from Anna Anderson and help take a 6-0 lead. Anderson later in the third quarter would find pay dirt with her legs that would make it a 2-score game that Baker would never fully close as they would fall 12-6. No matter how you analyze this game, it was a complete gridlock as neither team threw for over 200 yards, and the total first downs was only 19 in favor of Ottawa's 10. However, the Braves would dominate time of possession 25 minutes and 11 seconds to Baker's 16 minutes and 36 seconds, which makes a world of difference in these slow-paced games. Anderson would finish 25 of 38 for Ottawa for 197 yards and throw for a score while getting intercepted once, but would also find 63 yards of rushing and a touchdown as well. Linkus and Spielberg would haul in the majority of the receptions, but Linkus would have the most success with 92 yards and the score. But defensively, this Ottawa team needs to be praised as they always seem to bring it during the biggest moments and the biggest games, and this one was no exception. Veteran DJ Paris was imperative with 5 tackles and 2 sacks this game. Meanwhile, in the pass defense, Bethany Uribe and Jukani Washington had 9 total tackles, with Bethany getting that interception on Baker. Baker's defense was stout in their own right as Daniela Canals had 8 tackles and a sack. Natalie Bush had a sack amongst her 3 tackles, and Faith Phillips forced an interception, but the offense was held to a paltry 153 yards and just scored before the end of the game in what was a really frustrating day for this offense, and Baker drops their first one of the season to Ottawa. Like I said, 12-6, the Braves pull it out. Midland would demolish Bethel 67-0 in other KCAC action with 9 passing touchdowns across 2 quarterbacks. Livingston had over 100 yards. And shout out to Colorado standout Ducky Archuleta here. 6 receptions, 75 yards, and her first collegiate touchdown. Congratulations to Ducky. And please go ahead and review that interview that we had with her prior to her departure for the college level. Always happy to see Colorado talent getting it done, and especially happy for Ducky, just one of the nicest people you'd ever meet and one of the most fierce competitors that there is. K-Dub would defeat Heston 41-0. And then we're on to other action here as Kansas action is no longer in the works following Graceland's win over St. Mary 24-7. St. Mary cut into the lead just before halftime to make it 12-7, but G-Land would pull away. For the Spires, Brayley Chris caught a 32-yard touchdown to lead the day and also recorded both interceptions against the Yellow Jackets, while Eli Miranda had 2 sacks, but Graceland's defense notched 3 sacks of their own, and once again, Bird was everywhere in the backfield, intercepting passes and leading as the solo tackler. Sydney Gann had a couple of interceptions to boot, including a pick 6, and would also get a receiving touchdown. But Lammy on offense for Graceland would lead in touches with 11 receptions for 75 yards and get a rushing touchdown. Switching it up, Milligan would beat Ferrum 48-7. Kaiser had more touchdowns than incompletions, 29 of 35 for 397 yards and 7 scores, with Rumrill getting 5 of those receptions, 2 touchdowns, and Sam Urso getting 3 touchdowns on just 9 receptions. Arizona Christian would beat OUAZ 47-6. Macagnano went 6 touchdowns to just 1 pick and 343 yards, with Tobar getting 7 of those receptions and a score, Childress getting a score, Michaela Navarro getting 2, and Kayla Inuguez would get 2 of those as well, and Bella Hughes would get 3 sacks and 4 tackles for loss. There'd be a big GCAC matchup between La Sierra and Simpson. La Sierra pulling this one out just barely, in a full recap coming your way following this segment. Now on March 12th, Weber would outlast Florida Memorial 45-0. Reinhardt would beat Andrew College 58-0, and that would kind of take care of the big losses outside of La Sierra's 59-0 loss to Nevada State. Then Cumberland, in other action, would upset Campbellsville 25-0. Did not see Talkington in the box score, but it's really interesting as Campbellsville would throw 6 interceptions here. Cumberland getting contributions from Conger, Davis, Taylor, Robinson, and Say with 2 of those interceptions. And for the Tigers, the defense did what it could, but was just on the field all game. Scott had 9 tackles, and the unit had 6 tackles for loss, but could not match the turnover deficit as Madison Woodard strung together a solid game, going 25 of 42 for 208 yards and 3 scores. Marley Hyde leading the way for Cumberland with 7 receptions for 61 yards and 2 touchdowns, and 8 different receivers outside of that made catches, and Jessica Young found Pater on the ground for a convincing win to wrap up Thursday. Now, on the 13th, there was supposed to be a matchup between St. Mary and Kansas Wesleyan, but that was postponed. So we go back to Kentucky for Lindsey Wilson against Campbellsville, 2 Kentucky squads going at it here. And Lindsey Wilson would open up the scoring as Pablo would find Sermon for a touchdown pass, but the Tigers would respond quickly as Monica Montez caught a 31-yard touchdown from Amani Scott to tie the game 7-7 in the second quarter. But Lindsey Wilson would have just enough time to score before halftime and go up 13-7 and would not look back from there as they wound up winning 40-13. Amaya Pablo just continuing to dazzle here in this opening season for Lindsey Wilson. Went for 319 yards and 5 total scores, passing and rushing, going absolutely berserk in the second half, helping make this lead insurmountable. Meanwhile, for Campbellsville, Monica Montez was trying to will this offense along with 132 yards on just 5 receptions, but the Tigers just had inopportune turnover on downs, punts, and turnovers, and this was just not enough firepower to keep Campbellsville in this one, as Lindsey Wilson wins the first ever Battle of the Highway there, 40-13. Bruton Parker Christian would fall to Daytona State 27-0 to wrap up my NAIA recap of the 13th. And we move on to Saturday that had a ton of games, but maybe not the craziest competition until the very end here. Weber would take on Point, and Kariah Williams was at the helm at quarterback this game for Point, going 24 of 38 for a touchdown and a pick with a long of 36 to NAIA Wesley, who'd be on the receiving end of that, but it was in the fourth quarter, too little too late. Weber was nursing a 14-0 lead heading into the fourth quarter, but would finish it off. You had big contributions from Caitlin Sigmundi, who hauled in an interception and took her turn, leading this team with 12 receptions and a touchdown, with Edwards and Bolser also being on the receiving end of touchdowns. For the Point defense, Leah Prather and Kiera Thomas would both record interceptions, but that would only give Herrera a shaky final stat line, but the Warriors would win nonetheless 20-6. Kaiser and Thomas not being the classic it maybe once was, as Ava Wallace threw 5 touchdowns and Rivera threw 1 to make quick work of the Nighthawks in a 41-6 victory. Clam would get 3 touchdowns, and Sophia Caprio would get 2 scores, and Dakota Moberg would get her 1. Destiny Lockett would rush in for a touchdown for the Nighthawks to not get shut out, but the air attack never got clicking, and the Kaiser offense was just too much. Baker would respond in a big way following their defeat to Ottawa and would win 53-20. The Baker offense was clicking early and often, putting up 35 in the first half, and they would double up on Southwestern's first downs 24-12 and go for 529 yards of offense. Everybody was throwing touchdowns. Lorente threw 2, Waller threw 1, Alejandra Ramos threw 1, and so did Kaylee Phillips. Mahogany Simmons had 2 receiving touchdowns, Asmar had 2, and Phillips also caught 1. Southwestern, meanwhile, still got some good production from the likes of Mary Jones, over 100 yards and a pair of scores, and her quarterback Kennedy Hayes throwing 3 touchdowns to just 1 pick in almost 300 yards, so hopefully some positives to move forward with. In other KCAC action, it was all Midland against William Woods, as they would win 32-12, and those last 2 scores from the Owls coming late in the fourth quarter. Wolf put together a nice performance for the Warriors, throwing 4 scores, and all 4 of those touchdowns were caught by Aliyah Livingston, who was just feasting. A 4-touchdown performance made me wish that I actually started her in fantasy football for the college flag level. Now, the Owls did intercept the quarterbacks of Midland 3 times, with the Menards and Smith all getting 1, and Smith's going all the way to the Casa, but that was not enough in this KCAC matchup. Moving along here, we're getting into Reinhardt versus Cumberland. This game took place at Milligan, however, and after falling behind 6-0 early, the Eagles would respond and surge, taking a 20-6 lead into halftime and never looking back. Kind of an erratic day from Alexis Wilson as she threw 4 touchdowns but 3 interceptions, but a touchdown on the ground would help even that out a little bit and help Reinhardt come out victorious, as Wilson would find 4 different receivers for touchdowns and get 10 different pass catchers involved. Meanwhile, Marley Hyde of Cumberland would catch both of their passing scores from Madison Woodard, but Woodard would also find the defense a couple times too many in this narrow loss, as Cumberland falls to Reinhardt here. Milligan would defend home turf here, as they would throttle Cumberland 55-0. Kaiser with 6 scores, with Weirley running 1 and catching 2, and the Quins and Rumrill all getting their share of targets and touchdowns, and they would follow that up with a win over Reinhardt 33-14. Kaiser would get 5 scores, and Reinhardt would score all of their points in the last quarter. Ottawa keeps things rolling in the KCAC and blanks Graceland 33-0. Anna Anderson throwing for 3 and running for 2 touchdowns. And then in the GSAC, we had some crazy games here. Benedictine beats OUAZ 12-6. And while the game was 6-6 heading into halftime, it looks like Benedictine Mesa would score the last touchdown on a 10-play, 60-yard drive, as Ruiz would find Ashley Cataline to pull this close one out by the skin of their teeth. Gianni Ruiz went 23 of 44 for 134 yards and the go-ahead passing touchdown to just 1 interception. And she also began the scoring with a 47-yard touchdown that made up the majority of her 59 yards on the ground. Defensively, the squad was led by Katana Pabon Diaz here, who had 2 tackles for loss and a sack in this game of her 7 total tackles. Meanwhile, Emily Williams had an interception to help keep this game gridlocked. Jocelyn Smith would force an interception for the Spirit here, and offensively, there'd be a passing touchdown from Piemonte to Greenlee Henderson, but they did not even scrounge up over 100 yards of total offense and will have to get more consistent on the offensive side of the ball should they want to turn this season around. Speaking of offense and an absolute thriller, Arizona Christian, Nevada State, what a crazy game this was. And after ACU lost their first matchup with Nevada State 7-38, they came in looking hungry and for revenge. And they would start off on the right path as Childress would run in for a score and help ACU take a 7-0 lead. And Shea Gonzalez would catch a touchdown here in the first half to help them lead 14-7. However, the Firestorm would throw a pick six to start the second half here, and it would be all tied up 14-14. But Macagnano here would show poise and help them get back in the lead with a 60-yard connection to Alina Tobar, who would help them take the lead. But a missed PAT would loom as they would trail 21-20 heading into the fourth quarter against Nevada State. Now, Anelli Alba would help the Firestorm storm back into this game with a 43-yard touchdown reception, but the conversion would once again not be good, and Nevada State shows poise and does not go away and takes the late 28-26 lead and victory here in an absolute heartbreaker for Arizona Christian. Now, Macagnano would finish the day 22 of 39 for 328 yards and 3 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions. But mind you, one of those interceptions was a pick six. And the Firestorm were not short on big plays. They had splashes of 60, 43, and 38. But the missed PATs lead to the L here as Arizona Christian just narrowly loses 26-28, but are looking in pretty good shape here as we look at the GSAC, which gets me quite excited. And things are heating up in these conferences heading into this next stretch of March. I'm very excited to see where these things go, and I'm very excited to recap a crazy GSAC game for y'all coming up right after this segment. But as far as NAIA recap goes, that's going to do it for me for the overall picture. I was your host, Kodey Stoffer, for this segment, signing off. Peace. And for my game recap, I wanted to switch it up a little bit, and we're going to talk about some GSAC teams here. And we had an absolute nail-biter between La Sierra and Simpson University. And so for this game here, it's going to be a lot of back and forth between these two squads. And just honestly, a kind of a crazy turn of events in the first half as these teams just go interception for interception for interception. And I wish that was a bit of an exaggeration. But with La Sierra here, they get the football first. They're going to get a first down just outside of their red zone and basically arm punts it as Deborah Aguirre would make an interception and set up the Red Hawks around the 30 to start this game. Now, Simpson would stall out here, and a special team snafu would lead to La Sierra getting the ball inside of Red Hawk territory. But the Eagles would not capitalize as a tip drill interception fell in the hands of the Red Hawks, and they get the ball right back. But the drive for Simpson was even more short-lived than their last one as we get our third interception in the first quarter alone from the Eagles. Now, this drive would eventually stall out without an interception here, as they would just have a couple of incompletions and good pass breakups by the Simpson defense, and they would get the ball inside of their own red zone here. Now, Simpson would just do a short run to try and get some breathing room and try and get a first down out of their own red zone. And a couple plays later, they get a short swing pass to the left that gets to about the 29, but a bobbled handoff and a couple of incompletions later, they are forced to punt. Now, a swing pass right for La Sierra would give them a first down at the horn to end the first quarter 0-0. Now, there would be a penalty just a couple plays later, and it'd set up 4th and short for La Sierra as the quarterback would take off right and win the foot race for a first down, which is a little bit of foreshadowing for later. But the drive would still stall out as there'd be an interception deep in Simpson territory here for the Red Hawks that's gives them the football literally within their own 5-yard line. And if you thought you heard the end of the turnover game, you've already heard it a few times. It's actually not over, and maybe not a surprise here. As the Redhawks try and avoid the safety, they throw an ill-fated pass that gives La Sierra the ball on the 7 going in. And on the very first play of the drive, Grace Galdamez is going to throw the ball to the middle to a receiver who then laterals it to Kaylee Mejia here, who scampers in for the touchdown. And after the PAT is converted, La Sierra leads 7-0 here. Now, on the following Simpson drive here, the Eagles' pass rush is just diabolical here, and the interception lands in the hands of number 10, Alyssa Franco, and they force Simpson to take a timeout as La Sierra is on the red zone and knocking. Galdamez comes out here, rolls out right, and throws a crazy pass across her body to number 22, Brianna Leon here, and that pushes the Eagles into the red zone, but she is just a little too greedy, throwing off her back foot, and this would ring true 2 plays later as Simpson records yet another interception in this turnover-fueled game here. Simpson's offense would stall out, and they'd be forced to punt, which La Sierra would actually get a decent return just outside the 20, and after a first down to start the drive, the Simpson defense would push the Eagles back outside of the red zone with a sack, both on that play to start the red zone and on the play to end the drive for La Sierra. Simpson would move the ball somewhat well, getting the ball out quickly and to the left past midfield, but the deep shots would not connect, and the drive would result in a turnover on downs, and the half would not contain any more action. However, in the second half, Simpson would drive all the way inside the 5-yard line here, and they would get a great pass rush from La Sierra here, just forcing incompletion after incompletion, and then great flag pulls here would lead to a goal line stand for the Eagles and keep the Redhawks out of the end zone yet. But La Sierra would have to punt themselves as they go 3 and out deep in their own territory, and Simpson would stay persistent here and find themselves back in the red zone after a nice completion pushed them to the 19-yard line. A well-timed pass and catch on an out route gains a good chunk and puts them at 3rd and goal from around the 8, but however, an incompletion sets up a tough 4th down. Simpson's quarterback is under pressure, and she fires towards the back right corner of the end zone where she's got a receiver, and it's just out of reach here, and the Eagles somehow survive another Red Hawk red zone trip here, and one has to wonder if they'll keep getting away with it here. La Sierra does not want to find out, and they would like to score on this drive and increase their lead, and they would get a dump off to Mejia, who get outside of their own 20-yard line to end the third quarter. However, they complete a few more passes to start the 4th here, and a check down would just barely get past the first down, and you could tell that this team is just trying to bleed this clock dry with a short run and completion, but that sets up 3rd and long, and a check down turns scary as a couple of missed flag pulls sets up a way more manageable 4th and 9, but the Red Hawk defense steps up and gets a huge stop to give themselves the ball. The Redhawks come out like a boxer, hitting passes right, left, and right to get past midfield, and they are trying to put together a critical drive. They stay clicking with a few completions, but nonetheless face an insanely important 4th down and about 3 outside the red zone, and the throw is completed to Deborah Aguirre here, who just shows an incredible knack for the football here, and she scampers ahead inside of the 5-yard line, and that forces a La Sierra timeout as they try and recoup and get yet another goal line stand. The Eagles would bend a little bit, and Simpson would get 3rd and goal from the 2-yard line, where they would dial up a direct snap to Kylie Schultz, who finds the end zone here, and the PAT pass is good, and we got ourselves a 7-7 tied ball game here. La Sierra did not continue to get away with it in the red zone here, and now they have to lean on their offense to try and set up a go-ahead scoring drive. But they would fall just short, and they'd have to punt, giving Simpson the ball at their own 21-yard line with 2 minutes to make a statement. The first pass is incomplete, but the next two passes to the left set up 4th and 2, where amidst two rushers from La Sierra, somehow, someway, Sophia Wright escapes those two rushers and gets the first down just outside of the Eagles' 30-yard line, giving Simpson some more life. And they take a timeout here with 58 seconds left. Wright then gets the snap, winds up, takes a deep shot right to an open receiver, and it's overthrown yet again. And they'll have to settle here the following play for a left to the receiver who spins out of a few flagpoles, and now the Red Hawks get into the red zone. However, La Sierra gets a big flagpole to prevent a score, and the clock has 22 seconds when Simpson takes a timeout. A pass is completed to the center, who reaches for the goal line and extends, but the excitement is cut short here as a penalty pushes Simpson back damn near outside the 10-yard line. And after a run in the last time out here, Simpson has 9 yards and 9 seconds in this game. Now, with 9 seconds on the clock and the game tied 7-7, Simpson's going to take the snap, drop back, looking for the receiver, but Rosemary Vasquez is going to find the quarterback here and get a sack to end regulation for La Sierra, and Simpson tied at 7-7 here. Absolute madness between these two squads here, and the madness will only continue as we head into overtime of this insane game here. Now, in overtime here, both teams will get a chance to possess the football, but La Sierra is going to start with the ball here. And on the very first play of overtime, Grace Galdamez winds up, throws an absolute dot left to Danielle Gomez, who reaches up and snags the touchdown here. And on the PAT, Galdamez recreates that scene from earlier in the game and wins the foot race right, evading the pass rush and putting La Sierra ahead 14-7 against the Red Hawks here. Now, the Red Hawks, as I mentioned before, do get a chance to respond, and they will come out in a tight formation and complete a pass right that puts them at the 1-yard line. They come out tight again, trying to race ahead with the quarterback, but it is pulled short. Now on third down, the Red Hawks go back to an old classic. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's a direct snap to Schultz, who extends narrowly and scores for the Red Hawks here, making it 13-14. And now they just need to complete this PAT, and we'll face double overtime. And so they come out tight. Snap to the quarterback. She looks right and throws right, but the pass is broken up by La Sierra, and the Eagles win this nail biter 14-13 in an absolute thriller here, giving La Sierra their first conference win, bumping them to 4-3, and Simpson here in their second contest of the season falls to 0-2. But oh my, what a game this was here. Now, absolute madness befell this game at the beginning, as it was just interception after interception after interception after interception. Grace Galdamez walks away with 4 passing interceptions here. Meanwhile, Simpson throws 3 themselves. Now, they cleaned it up in the second half, as there are no turnovers in the second half, but 7 interceptions through the first half of play is pretty absurd and just something that I really haven't seen. And, I mean, the defense was making the most of it. You look at Simpson here. They got a pick from Taylor Zalunardo, I want to say is how you say that. They also got Amani Watkins in on the action. And Deborah Aguirre here led the team with 2 interceptions. And Sophia Wright, yes, the same Sophia Wright at quarterback for Simpson, had 2 sacks in this game. Meanwhile, offensively, Sophia Wright, 24 of 38 for 195 yards and 1 interception. Meanwhile, Kylie Schultz recorded as throwing 2 interceptions, but Schultz, on the other hand, rushing for those 2 touchdowns, keeping this squad in the game and giving them a chance all the way down to the wire here. I mentioned Deborah Aguirre for the defense, and offensively, she was still leading the way, 9 receptions for 72 yards. But La Sierra, the victorious team here, holding on, playing great team football. Alyssa Franco with 2 interceptions. Kaylee Green as well with an interception. Rosemary Vasquez with 2 sacks, including the one that forced overtime. And Mackenzie McMillan with the other one here. McMillan and Jacina Valdez here, both with over double-digit tackles, 21 combined between the two of them here. And as a unit, 6 tackles for loss and 6 pass breakups. Meanwhile, offensively, once again, Grace Galdamez, not the cleanest game, 4 interceptions, but 2 touchdowns when it absolutely mattered most here, finding that initial receiver who lateraled to Kaylee Mejia. Kaylee Mejia leading the team, 8 receptions, 46 yards, and a score, but Danielle Gomez with the go-ahead receiving touchdown here to put this team up ahead here. And obviously the PATs being the key difference as the La Sierra defense comes up big with that pass breakup on the final play of the game in overtime to come out with the narrow win, 14-13. Just an absolute nail biter. Very glad I was able to catch this game here. And the GSAC looking pretty interesting here as these teams will ramp up competition amongst each other. And if there's a rematch between La Sierra and Simpson, you can almost guarantee it'll be an instant classic. But La Sierra wins this first matchup between these two squads, 14-13 in overtime.
And that'll wrap up this episode of the Playmaker's Corner podcast. Make sure you check out our Thursday episode I believe 504, where we're going to go over the reasons for our rankings, which, by the way, are already released on our social media at Playmaker's Corner and on our website at playmakerscorner.com. But we will release our reasons on that episode this Thursday, as well as other recognitions that we've been doing. But once again, thank you so much for rocking with us, and we will catch you later.